The red Ferrari sat in the middle of the mansion's circular driveway like a wounded animal, sleek, beautiful, and lifeless. Its polished surface reflected the morning sun, but the engine hadn't roared in years. A small crowd of onlookers, guests, staff, and neighbors watched with curiosity as Richard Halden, a wealthy real estate tycoon, stood beside the car, laughing. "Anyone who can make it run," he said smugly, "can keep it." His voice carried the arrogance of a man used to being obeyed. The group laughed politely, though everyone knew it was more of a performance than an offer. The Ferrari wasn't meant to be fixed. It was meant to humiliate anyone foolish enough to try. That's when Marcus Brown arrived. He was tall, quiet, and dressed in faded jeans and a mechanic's shirt with grease stains that told stories of hard work. He didn't belong among the manicured lawns and designer suits. As he approached, the laughter dimmed. Some whispered, others smirked. Richard turned, eyeing him from head to toe. "You?" he sneered. "You think you can fix that?" Marcus didn't answer. He simply looked at the car, the gleaming red machine that had become a symbol of mockery. And then, at Richard. Something in his calm gaze made even the millionaire hesitate for a second. The air felt heavy with expectation, as if everyone sensed that this was more than a bet about a car. Marcus placed his hand on the hood and with quiet confidence said only, "I've seen worse." No one knew that behind that calm voice lay a past that would turn the entire scene upside down. Before continuing, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to support stories that uncover truth, injustice, and redemption. Your support helps keep powerful stories like this alive. The mansion belonged to Richard Halden, a man who defined himself by the things he owned. Glass towers, ocean view villas, and cars that cost more than most people's homes. To his elite circle, he was the self-made genius. To those who worked for him, he was arrogance wrapped in a tailored suit. Every Sunday, Richard held what he called his gatherings of greatness. Businessmen, influencers, and trust fund heirs came together to sip champagne, compare watch brands, and talk about who had made it. It wasn't about networking, it was about showing dominance. The Ferrari, a 1989 Testarossa, sat like a trophy of vanity in the middle of it all. It had once been Richard's favorite car, until it broke down during a high-profile charity race years ago. No mechanic had been able to revive it. Rather than fixing it, Richard turned it into a joke, a symbol, a prop to mock anyone he saw as beneath him. That morning, when Marcus walked through the gates, no one knew his name. He wasn't invited. He was there for a delivery. The mansion's gardener had told him the car might be available for a quick inspection job. Marcus was a small-time mechanic from the city's industrial district. He ran a modest garage with a cracked signboard and tools passed down from his late father. Business had been slow, bills had piled up, and yet he still carried himself with quiet dignity. When Richard saw him approach, curiosity turned to disdain. "The help wants to touch my car?" he joked loudly, earning a few cruel laughs from his audience. He made the ridiculous offer. "Fix it, and it's yours." The crowd laughed harder, but Marcus didn't laugh. He studied the Ferrari the way a doctor studies a patient, noticing the smallest details, the thin film of dust near the air vents, the faint smell of old fuel, the worn-out ignition harness. He didn't care about Richard's mockery. To him, it wasn't just a car. It was a challenge, maybe even a chance at redemption. In the background, the whispers began. Does he even know what he's doing? He probably can't afford a tire from that car. Maybe he'll get electrocuted trying. Marcus ignored every word. Years of dealing with prejudice had taught him one thing. Silence could be louder than pride. The sun climbed higher over the sprawling estate, its heat reflecting off the Ferrari's glossy frame. Marcus leaned over the open hood, his brow furrowed in concentration. Sweat ran down his temple, but his focus never wavered. Around him, The crowd of onlookers had split into two types, those who whispered mockingly and those who watched in quiet fascination, realizing this nobody wasn't as clueless as they'd assumed. Richard, lounging nearby with a cocktail in hand, smirked as he watched. "Take your time," he called out. "Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself." Laughter followed again, forced, uneasy this time. Marcus didn't look up. His mind was elsewhere, in another world, another time. He could almost smell the burning oil of a ship's engine room, hear the shouts of his unit above the roar of the sea. 10 years ago, he'd been a Navy engineer on the USS Montgomery, responsible for keeping the engines running during crisis missions. He'd led a small team of mechanics who respected him, not because of his rank, but because of his calm under fire. When the explosion happened, a fuel line rupture during a storm off the Gulf, Marcus had stayed behind to shut down the system manually. He saved the ship and the lives of 12 crewmen, but the blast left him with a fractured spine and months of rehab. When he finally returned home, medals didn't pay bills. The uniform didn't protect him from being looked at differently. Back at the mansion, he exhaled slowly and returned to the present. His hands worked with the same calm confidence he'd once used in combat zones. He adjusted a few components, traced the wiring, and cleaned the clogged fuel injectors using the basic tools he'd brought along, tools so worn they seemed out of place against the gleam of the Ferrari. Richard's guests were starting to whisper differently now. "Wait, he actually knows what he's doing. Look at the precision. That's not some random guy. Maybe he can start it." Richard pretended not to notice. He sipped his drink harder. "Even if it starts," he said, voice thick with disdain. "You really think I'd hand it over?" "Don't be ridiculous." Marcus heard him but didn't respond. Words meant nothing to him now, only results. He noticed something deeper, a problem in the fuel relay system, likely overlooked by every mechanic before. With calm precision, he adjusted the connection, then asked one of the staff for a small wire and a lighter. The butler hesitated, glancing toward Richard, who shrugged. "Sure. Let him burn something if he wants. Adds to the entertainment." Marcus used the heat to mold a quick seal and reattach the wire. It was improvisation, the kind of field fix that came from years of high-pressure problem-solving. The crowd had gone almost silent. The only sound was the chirping of distant cicadas and the click of Marcus's tools. Finally, he closed the hood and stood back. "Try it," he said quietly. Richard frowned. You're not driving that." Marcus simply stepped aside. "Then you do it." The challenge in his voice was calm but sharp, a tone that cut deeper than arrogance ever could. Richard, unwilling to look weak, rolled his eyes and slid into the driver's seat. He turned the key, expecting the same dull silence he'd heard for years. The engine coughed. Once. Twice. Then, with a low, powerful growl, the Ferrari came to life. The roar echoed across the courtyard, smooth and defiant. The red beast had awakened. Gasps filled the air. The guests stared in disbelief. A few clapped instinctively, while others exchanged stunned looks. Richard froze behind the wheel, his jaw tightening. He revved the engine. It purred perfectly, effortlessly. He got out, his expression a strange mix of anger and confusion. How did you—" Marcus simply wiped his hands on a cloth. "Sometimes," he said softly, "things don't stay broken. They just need someone who knows what they're doing." It wasn't arrogance. It was truth, spoken plainly, with a dignity that left no room for rebuttal. The tension thickened. The millionaire's ego couldn't process being outdone. Not by a stranger, and especially not by a black man he'd mocked minutes earlier. Richard forced a laugh. "Well," he said, his tone cutting, "a deal's a deal, right? Take it. It's yours." But everyone could hear the venom in his voice. This wasn't generosity. It was mockery wrapped in civility. Marcus didn't reach for the keys. He just looked him in the eye and said, "Keep it. You'll need it more than I ever will." The words hit harder than any insult. The crowd went silent again. Richard tried to regain his composure. "Suit yourself," he said with a tight smile, pretending not to care. But the cracks in his confidence were showing. Moments later, as Marcus walked away, one of the guests, a woman in her 50s, stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said softly. "You seem familiar." "Were you ever in the Navy?" Marcus paused. "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes widened. "You're Marcus Brown, aren't you? The engineer from the USS Montgomery? I read about you. You saved that ship." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones came out. People started searching his name. Within seconds, the truth spread like wildfire. The decorated veteran they had mocked was a national hero, awarded for bravery, featured in military journals, and honored for saving lives. Richard's smirk vanished completely. His face drained of color as the crowd turned toward him, their admiration shifting entirely to Marcus. Marcus looked back once, meeting Richard's eyes, not with anger, but with quiet disappointment. Then he walked toward the gate, the sun glinting off the Ferrari behind him, still humming proudly, as if it too knew who its true master was. What had started as a game of humiliation had turned into a revelation, and Richard Halden's perfect world was about to unravel in ways he couldn't imagine. The crowd's energy had shifted. What began as amusement had turned into unease, then silent shame. The laughter that once echoed across the marble courtyard was gone, replaced by murmurs and whispers of disbelief. "Is it really him? I saw the article. He saved his entire crew. How could Richard talk to him like that?" Richard Halden stood frozen, clutching his drink as if it were an anchor keeping him steady. His smirk was gone, replaced by a nervous half-smile. The glass trembled slightly in his hand. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out hollow. He looked around, desperate for support, but his audience was no longer with him. The same people who'd once cheered his arrogance now avoided his gaze. Their expressions ranged from embarrassment to quiet disgust. Marcus had already reached the front gate. He wasn't running, he never did, but every step he took carried the weight of dignity, calm, and self-control. He didn't need to say a word. The truth had already spoken for him. Richard's pride couldn't take it. "Wait!" he shouted, the word cracking through the silence. You think walking away makes you a hero? You embarrassed me in front of everyone." Marcus stopped, slowly turning around. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was pity. "I didn't embarrass you," he said quietly. "You did that all by yourself." The words hit Richard harder than a punch. His face flushed, veins standing out against his neck. For the first time, the crowd saw the man behind the wealth, fragile, insecure, desperate to be admired. He marched toward the Ferrari, muttering under his breath, "You want it? Fine. You'll have it." With reckless frustration, he climbed back into the car, revved the engine, and slammed his foot on the accelerator, trying to drown out the shame with the sound of horsepower. The tires screeched, smoke curling up from the driveway. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. The car jerked violently. The seal Marcus had crafted wasn't meant for showmanship. It was a temporary fix, never intended for abuse. The Ferrari sputtered, coughed, and then, with a loud metallic crack, died again, right in front of everyone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard sat there, gripping the steering wheel, face pale with shock. The once majestic car lay still, just as it had before Marcus touched it, as if it too refused to serve a man driven by pride instead of respect. Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm. "Machines are like people," he said. "They respond to how you treat them." And with that, he turned and walked away for good. The guests stared, not at the broken car, but at the broken man sitting inside it. The whispers began again, but this time they weren't about Marcus. They were about Richard, the millionaire who mocked a war hero and ended up humiliating himself. One of the guests, a young entrepreneur who once idolized Richard, muttered quietly, "Money doesn't buy class or respect." The words spread like wildfire through the gathering. Within hours, photos and clips had surfaced online. Videos of Marcus starting the Ferrari went viral. News outlets picked up the story. Veteran mechanic publicly humiliated by millionaire turns out to be a decorated Navy engineer. By evening, Richard's name was trending, not as a symbol of power, but of disgrace. His PR team scrambled to contain the damage, but the story was too strong, too poetic, too real. As for Marcus, he never spoke to the media. He returned to his small garage, working quietly as he always had. But this time, the world came to him. Journalists, veterans, even strangers who wanted to shake his hand. Richard, on the other hand, withdrew from the spotlight. The mansion that had once hosted glamorous parties now stood silent. The Ferrari sat in its usual place, cold and lifeless, a monument to arrogance. And every time he walked past it, he remembered the calm voice that had cut through his pride like a blade. "You did that all by yourself." All by... Weeks passed. The story that had begun as a private act of humiliation had grown into a national conversation. News outlets replayed the clip again and again, the arrogant millionaire's words, the roar of the engine, and the revelation that followed. Marcus Brown's name became synonymous with quiet strength and dignity. Veterans groups reached out to honor him once more, this time not for his service at sea, but for the way he carried himself on land, unshaken, humble, and strong. He never cared for fame. His garage remained the same, small, modest, and tucked away in the industrial part of the city. Yet there was something new about the way people looked at him now. Customers treated him with respect. Teenagers stopped by, not for car repairs, but to hear him talk about resilience, honor, and what it really means to be a man. When asked about Richard Halden, Marcus would only say, "Everyone's fighting a battle. Some people just hide it behind money." Meanwhile, Richard's empire began to crumble. The backlash had cost him contracts, sponsorships, and friends who preferred distance from controversy. His once celebrated image, the man who built himself from nothing, was now overshadowed by one viral moment that revealed everything wrong beneath his success. The mansion felt emptier with every passing week. Invitations stopped coming. His name, once a symbol of wealth, became a punchline whispered in luxury circles. But humiliation has a strange way of forcing reflection. Late one evening, Richard walked out to the driveway. The Ferrari still sat there, its paint now dull from neglect. He ran his hand over the hood, remembering the day he'd turned a human being into a spectacle for entertainment. The memory burned. He thought of Marcus, the man he'd mocked, the man who never raised his voice, never demanded revenge, and yet left him stripped bare before the world. For the first time in years, Richard felt something unfamiliar: humility. He sat beside the car for a long time, staring into the reflection of his own weary face on the metal surface. Then, without saying a word, he reached for his phone. The next morning, Marcus found an envelope slipped under the door of his garage. Inside was a hand-written note. "You were right. I did it to myself. The car's yours now, not as a prize, but as an apology. Maybe one day I'll learn to fix what's really broken." R.H. Marcus stood there for a long moment, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. He looked out toward the street, the rising sun glinting off passing cars, and smiled faintly. He didn't take the Ferrari. He donated it to a veterans' charity auction instead. The car that once symbolized arrogance and power now helped fund scholarships for injured servicemen and women, a full circle of redemption born not from revenge, but from grace. Months later, a journalist asked him what he felt when he read that note. Marcus paused, looked into the camera, and said, "People think strength means fighting back, but real strength is walking away when you know your worth." The clip went viral again. But this time, not for outrage, not for drama, but for truth. And somewhere far from cameras and headlines, a broken millionaire finally learned that sometimes the loudest lessons come from the quietest men. Power can be bought, but respect must be earned. Humility costs nothing, yet it can rebuild what arrogance destroys.